right, guys, you know what time it is. It's Metagame Monday. This is by far my favorite time of the week. It's basically where I make myself a cup of tea. I research the last legacy challenges and I try and make sense of it. So I decided some weeks ago that I wanted to make you guys part of that process. Might as well, right? And it seems like you guys are enjoying it as well. So keep showing it support and it will for sure keep going for a long, long time. So let's get into this week's legacy analysis. I have only 3 columns today, and this episode is going to be slightly different, but we'll get to that. On top of the metagame, I've looked at the 5 top 8s from the 5 challenges. We now have a full challenge schedule. Last week, I think we had some hiccups with Magic Online being down, so I focused on top 16. Let's see if that changes anything. So we're going to be having 40 decks under the scope today. And on top, we still have Delver. 9 copies out of these 40 top 8 slots were occupied by Delver. The vast majority of those were the Teamer variety, and then there's the lone Dimir Delver player, who's me. I do really like that deck. Delver's on top of the metagame. Why is that? So last time, I basically said that Delver is kind of the solution where, Days, Forcible Wasteland, those cards will kill whatever is in their way, right? You don't have to play against anything specific for those cards to be effective, and that is still true. You still Daze whatever the opponent is casting, you Force Will whatever they're casting. Delver is a solid deck. I will say the difficulty of this deck is incredibly high. So if you're playing Delver, make sure you get your micro decisions right. I talked to a friend this morning, and we basically agreed that if you get your micro decisions 95% right with Delver, then you're in contention for top 8. If you're below that, you need a very, very good day at the office in order to be in the top 8. And the reason why I'm mentioning that is because with some of the other decks, you don't necessarily have to get everything right to be competitive. So that is something to think about. Delver is harder, but Delver is a cool challenge, right? So on top of the metagame, we still have Dimir Reanimator. Dimir Reanimator put 6 copies in these top 8s. So that is trailing Delver, for sure, but still very, very established. Also, 3 copies of Fast Reanimator made these top 8s, so if you add those together, Reanimate Strategies is right there with Delver. So, on top of the metagame, we have Delver, 9 copies out of the 40, almost 25%, and Reanimator Strategies also at almost 25%. So that is very predictable at the top of the metagame. Let's keep that in mind. Down to 3 copies in the top 8s, we have Mono Red Prison. Mono Red Prison is on a very, very high play rate, but the conversion rate is slightly worse, right? So it sees as much play as Reanimator, but it only converts like half of Reanimator, maybe a little bit less. And that says a lot. So we still have to beat a lot of Blood Moons and Chalices in order to get to the Promised Land, but they're not converting as well themselves. So the classic problem with decks like Mono Red Prison, Eldrazi, stuff like that, the die roll is very important. When you win the die roll, you can kind of spiral Haymaker into Haymaker and win a lot of free wins. But when you're on the draw, all of a sudden, maybe you get Thought Seized, maybe you get Dazed, maybe the opponent gets something into play. It's night and day, basically. So let's say I play Mono Red Prison, I only win 40% of my die rolls. I'm realistically not top 8ing that tournament, right? So there's a bit of variance to that. The other card I've brought here is a new one to this list, Aether Vial. We saw a single copy of Esper Vial, and we saw 2 copies of Black-White Death and Taxes. So those kind of combine for similar play patterns where, you have value, you have answers, you have a good mana base, you have a way to circumvent counter spells. So that's pretty cool. Next up, we had 2 copies of Eldrazi. So Eldrazi is, finally making some splashes into the top 8s. Eldrazi is a deck that I've been curious about these last couple of weeks. It really fell off. But, still posting top 8s. My theory back then was that the deck, because of it being colorless, had a hard time building a good sideboard for a variety of decks in the metagame. When it comes to different combo decks, very hard to get your sideboard right. And you're behind the pseudo Ancient Tomb Mirror against Blood Moons, and that deck has a high play rate. Well, it kind of adds up, for me at least. So Eldrazi is still there, but very, very, let's say, tempered success. Then we still have Orzhov spells. Orzhov spells has ended my tournaments many times, more than I would like to admit. Orzhov spells is still very resilient. It suffers a lot from Reanimator being such a good deck in the metagame. But Orzhov spells is putting up a couple of top 8s between, 2 and 4. So that's, like 5-10% of the top 8s, despite the format focusing heavily on graveyard hate. So Orzhov spells still doing a good job, no surprise, and I'm super impressed by that deck every time I play against it. You're never really safe against that deck. So where I want to take this episode now is a place where I'm going to be highlighting a certain deck list that I like as a solution to the metagame. So last week I talked a little bit about, Temur Rhinos being in a good spot for the metagame where, you have 8 forces, that's good against combo. You have some good 4/4 bodies that's good against Lightning Bolt. You can devote stuff to the graveyard that makes it like a good deck choice, right? This week, I want to do the same, but I want to highlight another player's deck list here. I want to go straight into why Black-White Death and Taxes is doing great in this metagame. So what makes Black-White Death and Taxes, and also notice the loading time here. Let's just quickly make this deck more visible. What makes this deck competitive in this metagame, right? So, Black-White Death and Taxes. First of all, look at all the cards that are missing from old versions, like no Mother Runes, no Thalia, new equipment package. Like, we play Yorion, so, I used to play a lot of Death and Taxes back in the day, and I must say I'm very, very tempted to pick it back up again. So let's try and quickly talk a little bit, fold this deck out in a vacuum before going into the specifics of why it's faring so well in the current metagame. So what is this? What is this deck trying to do? This deck is trying to play broad answers like Thoughtseize, like Plow, like Solitude. Those cards are just, solid magic cards. Orcish Bowmasters, you can add to that pile as well. And from there, we kind of get to a point where, what's the upside of this deck? Okay, we can free roll 4 Karakas into our mana base. That's pretty good. That's going to be awesome against various legends, protecting our own stuff even. We play Ethervile, which is incredibly good in our opener. If we have Ethervile in our opener, this deck is great. Maybe even beyond great. We play Yorion to make sure we win longer games. Oh, by the way, I'm missing 2 sideboard cards here. These 2 cards. We're hiding out there. We play individual card quality. We play 1/2 punches here with Overlord of the Belmerk with Failure. So basically, Overlord of the Belmerk is a value card. If you play it for 2 mana, you mill 4, then you return a creature or planeswalker from the graveyard to your hand. So usually that's going to cantrip. And then we have Failure. So if we ever connect with a Failure, we can flicker the Overlord, and all of a sudden we have a 5/5 that does the same every time it attacks. So also a couple of Flicker Wisps in order to get that going. So we have that 1/2 punch. And also, I want to mention this. This deck benefits from Draw Go. This means if you can stall the game out, you have Vile ticking up, you have Overlord ticking up or down. I don't know. Oh, ticking down. And then, that's just a good place to be where, Thoughtseize this, Plow that, Solitude that. Like, we benefit from trading 1 for 1 because we have some stuff ticking up. Well, actually, this deck, it's not ticking down. They're all ticking up, but you get the point here. Mana base is also very, very resilient. We play a lot of basics. We only play 2 colors, and we have Wasteland in it. And here's the kind of the cool thing I want to get into, the toolbox aspect of the deck. Let's talk a little bit about Recruiter of the Guard. So Recruiter of the Guard can go and get, Flicker Wisp for grind, Trawler to clear the graveyard. We can go get Lion Sash as also a way to, have a white scavenging ooze, basically. We can go get our Ophelia. We can go get our Disenchant effect. We can go get Bowmasters. We can go get a Plow effect. So Recruiter of the Guard is a very expensive card, but it's very flexible, right? So again, we benefit from a longer game because we play cards like Recruiter. Let's talk a little bit about the Stoneforge Mystic package here. So back in the day, we used to run Jite, Batterskull, stuff like that, but that has changed. I believe there's one more equipment. So we do play these 4 equipments. We play Cauldron Complete, which basically says if Stoneforge survives, you're putting on a big clock on your opponent. We play Pre-War Formal Wear, which is a grindy element. It's this card where you expect your Stoneforge to die, and this especially shines against black removal or red removal. At that point, it just becomes, card advantage, where earlier on, let's say I Stoneforge for Battle Skull, it dies to a Lightning Bolt. That Battle Skull might not ever do anything. We have Lion Sash. Once again, this is an equipment and a creature card when you're searching. And you're able to, 2-drop your Scavenging Ooze. And you have Phantom Blade, which is basically, once again, it's a card that if you expect your Stoneforge to survive, this card is awesome. Also, it's good if you can flicker it, so it has some synergies there when it comes to killing creatures over and over. So that Stoneforge package is very, very strong. Then we just have a solid card like Skyclave Apparition. I should actually have included this down here because that's just a solid card. Then we play White Orchid Phantom. So when it enters, destroy up to 1 target non-basic land. It's controller, so basically Ghost Quarter, right? Except you can target basics, I guess. This is very good in a format of decks with little to no basics. It's gonna, especially if you can blink it, right? So even against Delver, at some point it becomes a big threat. Killing a volcanic island, they search a basic island. And then, well, because we're a wasteland deck, they might already have searched a basic island. That's kind of the cool thing about the deck. And this card in general. Flicker Wisp, it's kind of easy to kill if you're facing Poemaster, so we are not relying fully on that card. I'm really impressed by this deck on paper. So let's see what we're trying to do in the sideboard. Looks like we're trying to address Spell Combo. We're trying to address Graveyard and Nadu. We have a tutor target here, Plague Engineer, that can say something like name the Nomad and Core out of Nadu as well, or Elves, or whatever the case may be. And then we can actually play Wrath of the Skies because we don't have that much. We have like 4 Ethervial as the only 1-drops. So whether we're trying to kill, Dreadnoughts or Ursa Saga decks or, Delver, Channeler, or whatever, this card is decent. So actually having a deck that can support Wrath of the Skies is quite cool. And then a single Mindbreak Trap for good measure. If you want to play a 4th, Deafening Silence, I don't think that's going to be a problem. And then we have the Yorion as our commander. But basically, this card ensures that you're winning the longer games, especially how it works with Caracas, getting Revile up to 5. Yeah, I mean, I'm not worried about this deck's late game. I'm worried about getting out of the gates, right? So why is this deck successful right now? And once again, it only put a couple of people in these debates, but it's still a deck that kind of came from left field, so I think it's worth highlighting. So I'm not overreacting here. I'm basically saying what a great metagame choice it was for these players. So look at the metagame. We need to handle the graveyard. That's kind of a sideboard thing. But we also have main deck stuff that can handle the graveyard, between Stoneforge and Recruiter of the Guard. Tutoring for Lion Sash, tutoring for Boggart Trawler. So we can handle the graveyard. We are playing against a lot of Chalices out of, Mono Red and Eldrazi, and our only 1-drops are 4 Plows, 4 Vials, and 4 Thoughtseize in a deck with 80 cards. That's not a lot compared to a lot of other decks, right? Then we also need to address Blood Moon and Wasteland out of, Delver and Mono Red Prison. And we can do that. We play a ton of basics. We play, we have a Prismatic Vista mana base, and we play Ethervial. So we can kind of play through mana denial. Next up is Daze, because Reanimator and Delver are Daze decks. This deck is also good against Daze, because you can either delay your game plan or use Ethervial. So all in all, these are like great factors for this deck to have success. And kind of like the Rhinos deck, it's basically where I see a result, and I'm wondering, why did these guys succeed? And I think this is just a great way to look at Magic, and that's why Magic never gets old. It's this constant whole of just ideas, analysis, and you're just trying to make a final product for the right reasons and then try and do well, right? It just feels so good. These players are like, maybe Black-White Texas is awesome. We have, the 1-2 punch with Overload Failure. We have a good mana base. We don't care about Chalice. If we have a Vial, we're really doing it to these Delver decks. Then maybe if you just build our sideboard to not lose to the graveyard, and I'll be fine. This is pretty darn cool, if you ask me. So what is this deck losing to? And with that question, let me get to what the rest of the metagame looks like. So we already covered the Delver, Reanimator, Prison, and Eldrazi and Oops, right? Beyond that, we had 3 Doomsday decks in the top 8s. those 3 Doomsday decks were 2, let's say, normal versions, and then 1 version that basically played Storm and Doomsday in the same deck. Pretty cool. This deck will have a tough time with that, but I think going just to 4 Deafening Silence here is going to give you a honest chance between, you know, Thoughtseize, Deafening Silence, and then just their deck's inability to function. What else do we have? Now we just get into the one-ofs. We have 1 Grixis Control, 1 Killer Bee deck. Killer Bee deck is basically, you know, some kind of Storm-ish deck. Sometimes she's leaning artifacts, sometimes she's leaning rituals. We had a copy of Yorion Spellseeker, which is basically this 80-card super value deck. Spellseeker, Toolbox. You're following similar logics to this deck, but this deck is just a bit more streamlined. Then we have blue-black midrange with no Force of Will in it, also making a top 8. We had lands, kind of a comeback. Shout out to Ellie, my good friend. Then we had a single copy of Dredge and a single copy of Dimir Tempo, which is basically a Delver deck. I think I'm forgetting one here. Yeah, 1 Esper Stoneblade as well, which is, you know, half Dimir Tempo, half control, you know. It's a mid-range deck that's trying to address the format much like this one, right? So this amounts to 12 graveyard decks, 10 tempo decks, 5 stompy decks, 5 control decks, and 4 spell combo decks, and then a little bit of a mixed bag. So still, graveyard and tempo, those are on top. Stompy we have to address. And I've listed this under control. I think this is a control deck because of how it plays out. It plays a lot of creatures. I remember back in the days, people, you know, oh, White Weenie and Legacy, but that's never really been a thing. It's always been a controlling deck. It's trying to react to what's going on. It's not trying to, you know, kill anybody fast. It's looking to address the format and then slowly but surely grind into the sunset. And that is exactly what I expect this deck to do in the week to come. I might give this deck a try myself. I think it's a very, very creative solution to the metagame, and I'm happy that it paid off for these players. So shout out to Yoshiwada and the other player who made top 8 with this sweet iteration. Also, a lot of room to innovate here, I would imagine, when it comes to. I mean, you're a Stoneforge and Recruiter deck after all, so switching up on some one-offs here and there. Yeah, for sure that's going to happen. Also, last thing I want to mention: 0 Nadu decks in these top 8. 0 out of 40. So whether that's, you know, an issue of MTGO being a bit clunky for the combo, whether it's simply not well positioned, whether the deck got unlucky, only time will tell, right? But for now, very low numbers of Nadu to be reported. And yeah, that's actually going to do it for this week's episode of Metagame Monday. So yeah, don't sleep on your graveyard hate. Make sure you have game against Daze. Don't fold to Blood Moon or Chalice, and you'll be fine. See you next time.